Welcome to those of you who are here in person and those of you who are joining us online. I'm Melissa Barnett. I'm the director of the Francis McClelland Institute for Children, Youth, and Families. And before we get started with today's talk, I hope that you join us again for an in-person event at the end of the semester where we can showcase the research by our undergraduate and graduate students. You joined us today to hear Dr. White speak. Before we get to his talk, I want to give us a little bit of background. And of course, because we're here at the University of Arizona, I also want to start with our land acknowledgement that was agreed, an official agreement between the University of Arizona and tribal partners. We respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education, offerings, partnerships, and community service. Here at the Francis McClelland Institute, our goal is to move beyond university walls to build collaborative partnerships to build family resilience that facilitates children and youth from marginalized families the opportunity to thrive. We do this by supporting innovative research, by actively partnering with community organizations, by sharing research findings with practitioners in the community, and educating the next generation of engaged scholars and leaders. All of the work that we do is to recognize the legacy of Francis McClelland, who lived a life that celebrated, facilitated, and demonstrated resilience. Francis was a tireless advocate and generous philanthropist. And I think it's especially important to mention here on St. Patrick's Day that she was the daughter of Irish immigrants at a time when Irish immigrants were very much a disparaged, discriminated against, prejudiced against group. She was very proud of her Irish heritage, and that influenced her in many ways to be such a strong advocate for marginalized individuals, those from immigrant backgrounds, individuals with disabilities, as well as children and women. Also happy to honor another distinguished alum, Pam Turbeville, who is so instrumental to so many of the things that we can do at FMI, but also here more broadly at the Norton School. So thank you to Pam Turbeville. Finally, without further ado, so pleased to mention our colleague. We were just thrilled to have Dr. White join us here in the Norton School and as an FMI faculty affiliate this year. Dr. White earned his PhD in consumer sciences with a focus on family resource management from the Ohio State University. His research interests involve financial education, socialization, and well-being of historically marginalized families and individuals. His work can be seen in core financial planning journals, such as the Journal of Financial Planning, Journal of Financial Therapy, Journal of Family and Economic Issues, Journal of Financial Counseling and Planning, and Financial Services Review. Dr. White regularly collaborates across disciplines with colleagues at universities and colleges nationwide, and often conducts research with current and former students. Dr. White teaches financial planning courses in the Norton School CFP board registered program. Again, we are so happy to welcome you today. And I will stop sharing these. And we can go ahead and bring up patient. Okay. Oh, is it the wrong version? Still figuring out the hybrid setting. We should have it figured out by now.
All right. So this is way more people than I expected to have. This is great, though. I am very happy to be here. I was looking at the lineup of the speakers that have been here before, so I'm just really honored to be a part of the speaker series here. I am going to be sharing some of my research, and this particular paper is titled "How Financial Socialization Messages Relate to Financial Management, Financial Optimism, Financial Stress," and we're going to look at variations by race. And this is some research that came out a couple years ago. As I was preparing for this session, I told Tim that I had done this presentation before, but this is actually the first time I've ever talked about this research. And so I'm really excited about that, because this is one of my favorite projects of all the ones that I've done. I was talking to one of my colleagues, one of the collaborators on this one, and she said, you know, if I could marry a paper, it would be that. And so, you know, I think that this paper is important, not just because it fills a gap in the literature, but I think the message that is there is one that's really important. And so I'm just excited to talk about it. So I want to get to the results, but I do know that I have to kind of set it up for you all. But I always talk about my collaborators because I don't do this work on my own. And so in this paper, I have 4 other scholars that worked with me. Kimberly Watkins is an assistant professor at the University of Georgia in financial planning, housing, and consumer economics. And in parentheses, that's the area that they got their PhD in. So she received her PhD in financial planning. Megan McCoy and Bertrana both graduated in HDFS, and in particular, the marriage and family therapy programs. But Megan works in the personal financial planning department at Kansas State. And Bertrana is actually in counseling and family therapy at Drexel University, which is in the College of Nursing. It's impressive. And Jamie Lynn she got her PhD in financial planning also. And it's not that I don't care about her affiliation. She just works, she doesn't work in academia anymore. She works in industry. And so she's actually works at a financial planning firm. But I highlight this because I took time to highlight this because, like I said, it's important to acknowledge the people that do this work, but also it's important to let you all know that I work with HDFS people. And so hopefully, and particularly marriage and family therapists, so hopefully I can get some street cred in this in the Norton School, and some of the doctoral students will want to come and work with me, maybe study family resource management. I don't know, maybe we can have a family resource management class in HDFS one day. I don't know if we have it now already, but. All right. So to get started, the first thing is I have to define financial socialization. And honestly, I'm a little nervous because we have experts in financial socialization sitting at the end of the table. But also one of the graduates, Ashley LeBaron Black, who does a lot of work in financial socialization. So if I say this wrong, just forgive me, okay? But financial socialization is the process of acquiring and developing values, attitudes, standards, norms, knowledge, behaviors that contribute to financial viability and individual well-being. So basically, financial socialization is the process of how we learn about money. And that process is akin to social capital, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about. It's believed that every individual or every household has 3 forms of capital that they need to really manage: your financial capital or your economic capital, your human capital, but also your social capital. And so financial socialization is in that same vein of social capital. It's a little different, but it's in that same vein. But the process also involves socialization agents. Those agents being parents are probably the primary agents, socialization agents. So when we talk about children, youth learning about money, they learn from their parents either directly through actual messages or conversations that they have, or they can learn indirectly through modeling and we can, children and youth can observe what their parents do around money. Others, depending on who you ask, other socialization agents could be formal financial education programs. So like classes and workshops that you would take at a school or an employer. That can be considered a form of financial socialization, teaching us about attitudes, norms, especially the norms are one of the things that's important. But also socialization agents can be like an employer. So if you have a job and you work and earn money and you have some experience managing your money that way, that can also be considered a form of socialization. So a process through which we learn about money, okay? So what is financial socialization? Is that process of learning about money. So let's talk about my motivation for this particular project. First, research suggests that financial socialization is beneficial for your long-term well-being. Your financial well-being, but also your overall well-being, because whether you like it or not, money impacts every area of our life. And so our attitudes, our biases, our behaviors around money is going to impact many areas of our life. Research suggests that race and ethnicity might play a role in financial socialization. Okay? Research also suggests that the socialization agents and the quality of the relationships may also impact our financial socialization or impact that process. But one of the main drivers of that I had for doing this project was that we talk about the actual relationship between parent and child, and we talk about how children can learn from parents through observation or receiving these direct messages from them. But there's some limitations there. Like, for example, we often don't know the strength of those relationships. And so if you were talking about social capital, you would be talking about ties. Is it a weak tie? Is it a strong tie? Maybe is it bonding, bridging? But so we don't always know what the quality of those relationships are. Another thing that we often don't know, though, is what kind of content or the actual message that's being communicated to our children. Even though parents are like the primary source of our socialization, they may or may not be the best source of information. And so we often don't know what the parents are teaching children about money. Are they teaching them positive financial behaviors? Are they teaching them negative financial behaviors? Are they teaching them norms that have been around in families for years or generations, but may or may not be what we would consider the normative values that you want when you are managing your money for long-term financial well-being. And so that was really the motivation behind this project. But there's also my lived experience. And I've used these photos before in presentations, but I just wanted to, it fits so well, I just kept it for this one. And so that handsome young man that's there in the t-shirt that says everything's going up but my allowance. Yes, that's me. But even back, I put that in there because even back then, I understood inflation. And I understood that something had to happen for me to overcome inflation. And so Yeah, I was out advertising it earlier. But the picture next to it is me as obviously a much older man, but that's my dad next to me also. And in my lived experience around financial socialization, my dad would always tell me, make sure you save some money, make sure you save some money. So I got that direct message from him to save money, which is a great message. I mean, it is definitely important to save money. But there were some things missing. Like once I saved the money, what was I supposed to do with it? Where was I supposed to save it? How was I supposed to save it? So I knew that I should save money, but it was just an incomplete message. And so that's part of the motivation for much of the research that I do is just my own lived experience and growing up in neighborhoods where we had low income households, we had lower net wealth families, and so I kind of draw upon those lived experiences and the motivation for my work. All right, so now let's talk about the questions that were asked in this project. And this will give you a sense of the purpose of the work and where we're going. So we really asked two questions here. The first question, how do the types of financial socialization messages, not the process, but the messages received, given by parents to their children, how do those vary by race? The second question is, how do the relationships between those messages that students receive and the different outcomes that we looked at in this project, how do those vary by race? So those were the two research questions that we sought to answer. All right. In order to answer those questions, I want to first take you on a little journey. Okay. So let's go on a little journey about conversations about money. Here's the big problem with it, is that we don't talk about money. Not enough people have enough conversations about money. Money is kind of this taboo topic that people often don't want to talk about for whatever reason. We shouldn't talk about it at work. We shouldn't talk about salaries at work. We shouldn't talk about it at home. And this is my opinion, but it's an educated opinion that the lack of conversations is one of the reasons why you have things like financial infidelity in families, because people just aren't talking about money enough. And this particular project, we looked at, and I'll talk more about the data in a minute, but between 2011 and 2015, nearly 83% of the respondents in this data set said that they had not had a financial discussion in the past 12 months. Now, here's one limitation to this study is that we didn't define and we couldn't define financial discussions. And so it's just a self-report. They could have talked about something related to money and they didn't consider it a financial discussion. So they would have said, no, I haven't had a financial discussion within the past 12 months. And so that not having that, being a self-report and not having that definition of financial discussion is a limitation, okay? But if you look at it, the breakdown by race and ethnicity, 87% of the Black respondents said that they hadn't had a discussion about it. 87% of the Hispanic respondents said they hadn't. And almost 80% of NBNH is non-Black, non-Hispanic. Okay. So we see that the conversations are not happening. And but for those that do talk about money, if we use non-Black, non-Hispanic as a reference, then our Black respondents were less likely to talk to their partners when they did have of the people that did have financial conversations. If you extend that out to other family members, then compared to our non-Black, non-Hispanic group, both Blacks and Hispanics were less likely to talk to families. But if you look at the friend category, then compared to non-Black, non-Hispanics, the Black respondents were more likely to talk to their friends about money. So what's happening is the Black respondents, the individuals that classified or categorized themselves as Black or African American, although they're less likely to talk to their partners or families, so have these conversations in the home, they look to their friends outside the home, and so they are having conversations, but it's more likely they're going to talk to the friends. And then prof is not professor, it's professional. And so that can be, we had to group this category because it was kind of small, but that can be professionals with financial expertise, or it could be other kinds of professionals, like a counselor, a teacher, a religious leader. And so there was no difference though when we looked at the professionals. And then none, I just added that one to this slide because it's still a reference to the previous slide about not having financial conversations at all. But if you noticed, the odds ratios are higher that Black and Hispanic individuals are more likely than non-Black and non-Hispanic individuals to not have any financial conversations. All right, so now we're starting to see some of the variances by race and ethnicity about just having conversations at all, no matter what the topic is, about money. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the data. So the data for this project came from the 2014 National Student Financial Wellness Survey. It has been renamed since then. It's called the Study on Collegiate Financial Wellness now. And it's survey data that's collected at The Ohio State University. And it's collected every 3 years. And you might say, well, 2014, 2017, and 2020. So there's more current data that's out there. However, the more current data doesn't ask the questions that we need in order to answer the research question. So the 2014 was the data that we had to use in order to answer the research questions. So in 2014, 52 institutions were surveyed. So these are colleges and universities nationwide. And there's 2-year public, 4-year public, and 4-year private institutions that participate in this survey. The University of Arizona did participate in 2014, did not participate in 2017, but then again in 2020 participated. The response rate is 11.5% for the survey. So they sent out over 160,000 requests, and the response rate was 11.5%, which could be considered a limitation for the study, but it kind of is what it is. But that gives us 14,662 students that actually reported their race or ethnicity. And so 72% were white, 5% Black, 6% Hispanic, or Latino, 6% Asian, and 8% checked off more than one. And then 4% we other. Other is like, for example, it would be like Native American. And the groups that were too large to have too small to have their own category, we just kind of put in other. I don't like the other people, but for purposes of the research we had to. All right, so that's the data. I just paused in case somebody had some questions.
There was question.
Okay.
They haven't answered yet. Oh, yeah. They haven't said anything yet. It's just like.
Okay.
X that just so it doesn't cut the PowerPoint.
I have a question,
Okay.
going back to that data slide. So that racial breakdown, how does that compare to what we know is like the general demographic breakdown for college students?
So it's a really good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I think that if we were looking, I think part of it depends on the region. And so, if we were looking specifically in the Southwest, like for example, the data that was collected by the University of Arizona is going to be higher, have a higher Hispanic or Latino population. And so I think part of that depends on the region, but yeah, I'm not sure if I have a good answer for that. Yes.
Just kind of, you said it was a limitation with the reports, the frequencies of having had financial conversations in the past 12 months. I don't think it's a limitation, right? It's a really interesting data point. Like if they're not saying that there are financial conversations, then they're not to them, right?
Right.
And what we care about are financial conversations, and then recognizing that that's what that is.
Yeah.
I think that's actually a really valid, interesting data point, and I don't think it's a limitation. That's
Yeah.
wrong.
Okay. All right. All right. Scratch. We'll have no more limitations.
Just on
Yes.
that slide.
And Google search, your question, I don't know, like, if this is a good site, so ncef.gov.
That's a good one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so college, this is 2020, so not exactly 2014. College enrollment rate in 2020 was higher for 18 to 24-year-olds who were Asian, 64%, than for those who were white, 41%, Hispanic, 36, Black, 36, for two or more races. Is that right?
That's within each group,
Yeah.
what the percentage of college enrollment is.
No, that one's done. Okay. Yeah, I'll people can get after it.
All right, so we have 3 dependent variables that we looked at. And it's in the title. The title said financial management, stress, and optimism. So those are our 3 dependent variables. They are, we created scales for these variables. And I put this here so that you could see the questions that go into each scale. So financial stress is basically, do I have enough money to do the same activities as my peers, to enjoy the activities that to do the activities that I enjoy? Or do I feel stressed about money in general? Or do I have some worries? Worry about paying for expenses, or worry about paying for school. Financial optimism is, so when you talk about financial stress, the way I like to look at financial stress is how you feel about your current situation, your current financial situation. There's some stressors that can come into play, and then how you deal with those stressors determines the level of financial stress that you will have. In another study I did, we found that Black college students or African-American college students experience financial stress at a higher intensity than their non-Black peers. The only thing I can say is that about their non-Black peers, because I specifically looked at African-American students in that study. Financial optimism, I like to think about it as how you feel about your financial future. And so, are you optimistic about the future? Do you think that once you finish school, you'll be able to take care of yourself financially? Or is college still a good investment in terms of my financial future? So that's financial optimism. And then financial management is kind of a mix in this particular study. There's a mix of things that the students did or do, like budgeting, tracking their spending, making sure they're tracking their transactions or checks, which would require them to monitor their account balances and bank accounts, checking accounts. But there's also this confidence piece that goes into financial management. Do you feel like you can manage your money well, or how confident are you in managing your money? So these are the three dependent variables that we use to create a scale. I'll just say that we did check the alphas on these and the reliabilities on these, and they all fell within acceptable categories. Optimism had the lowest alpha, and so, but it was still acceptable, even though it was a little lower than the other two. All right, our independent variable, which the independent variable is the three messages that the students received. So there were three questions in the survey, and the students just answered yes or no to those questions. One, did your parents or guardians encourage you to save money? So if you ask economists, an economist would say that saving is anything that increases your net wealth. And so that can be actively putting money aside, or it could be paying down your debts. And so either of those would be considered saving if you were to ask an economist, because both of those things would increase your net wealth. The second question is, did your parents or guardians encourage you to open a bank account? So right now, we might not want to talk about opening bank accounts, but that was one of the questions. Saving money and opening a bank account are highly correlated. So these two questions are very similar, but the third question, did your parent or guardian encourage you to invest your money? That one was not as highly correlated as the other two. And so those are the three messages, the three financial socialization messages that the students could report receiving. And then we have our list of covariates, our control variables. The mother and the father's education, as well as the annual income of the parents, were added to try and get at the SES of the parents, because that's important in terms of the socialization and what they actually teach and model to the children. All right. So here's the analysis. And we have to just get through this so that we can get to the exciting results, because the results are so exciting. So just bear with me for a little while longer. But our data analysis for question number 1, where we tested how the 3 types of messages varied by race. So we just did chi-square test for that. So we looked at each of the messages, save money, open a bank account, investing, and we looked at it by race. Okay. The second question we did was a multivariate analysis, and we just did multiple general linear models trying to estimate the correlation between the messages and the outcomes. The outcomes were financial management, stress, and optimism. Okay. It also included interactions. So we interacted race with the message to see if that or how that impacted the outcome. So that's the data analysis for question number 2. Now let's get to the results, because I think that this is going to be something that I believe needs exposure, more outreach. And so if we look at the race and ethnicity by the message received from parents, and this was prior to college, we see here that for saving and banking, it's almost the same, no matter what the race is. It's, in the 80% of the respondents said, yes, I received, or my parents encouraged me to save money. Yes, my parents encouraged me to open a bank account. The most interesting part, though, is about the investing message. It was so much fewer students actually said that their parents encouraged them to invest their money. And we see that Hispanic or Latino population actually received that message the least. I was really surprised that in this particular case that the white students and the Black students were right about the same. And we see that Asian students had the highest rate of receiving that investing message. All right, let's look at the regression results, though, because the regression results, this is where a lot of the a lot of the interest or the emphasis should be placed on these regression results, because we see from here that for each outcome, whether or not students receive the message to invest their money had a significant impact on their financial management, their financial stress, and also their financial optimism. So students that receive the message from their parents to invest their money were more likely to have higher financial management scores, were more likely to have higher financial optimism scores, and were less likely to have more financial stress or higher financial stress scores. So if you want to say it the other way, they were less likely to feel stressed about their money, right? So that's the message. So now we're starting to see how important it is that we not just talk to children and youth about money, but the message itself is important. And so instead of you know, I opened it up with talking about my lived experience with my dad and him telling me to make sure you save some money. Well, making sure I save some money is not the message that had the impact on my financial, or would have had the impact on financial management, financial stress, and financial optimism. It's that message about make sure you save some money, which is what I was trying to get across with the t-shirt I was wearing. I was like, inflation is going up. And so I need to invest my money so that I can beat inflation, right? I need to invest my allowance so I can beat inflation, or I'm never gonna get ahead as a kid. So the investing message is important. If you look at the highlights, and I know that highlighting is not universal design and learning approved, but, and so if you have some issues with seeing color, then just give me a nod or something and I'll point to the ones that have the highlights. But also optimism. When we think about financial optimism, look at how financial optimism is impacted by race. And so remember, financial optimism is about how you feel about your financial future. Do you think you're going to be able to care for yourself after graduation? Well, if Black is our reference group, then each of the other race or ethnicities, white, Asian, multiracial, other, are less likely than the Black respondents to feel optimistic about their financial futures, which is kind of interesting to me. And so I want you all to think about that for a minute. And if you have something to add about why you think that might be, I'll be interested in hearing it. So those are our regression results. There's a couple of other results, significant results when it comes to stress and management, but optimism and investing are the two most salient outcomes here, or the two most salient results here. And then we talked about the interactions, right? So we looked at the message interacted with race. And so this is saying, for example, the stress message. And so how does Asian students that received the message to save their money, how do they compare to Black students that received the message to save their money? Well, according to our results here, Asian students that received the message to save money from their parents were statistically more likely to feel financial stress than Black students that received the message to save their money. And again, that financial optimism category has a lot of statistical significance there. One thing that we see also is that in each case, when we're talking about Hispanics that receive the message to invest, Asian students that receive the message to invest, and then our other category that received the message to invest. There was a lot of statistical significance there also with our financial outcomes if you compare them to the Black students that received the message to invest their money. All right, so what are our main takeaways here? Main takeaways: African American students receive the least saving and banking messages compared to other racial groups, and our Hispanic students, they reported receiving the investing message least of all. Okay, so what does that tell us? That one is that particularly in Hispanic households, we can find ways to have those to help those households have more conversations about investing. Second takeaway: students who received the message to invest were more likely to demonstrate higher average financial management, lower stress, higher financial outcomes. So they're more likely to have these better financial outcomes just by receiving the message to invest their money, talking about investing. So what does that look like? Teaching children investing concepts that are involving more comprehensive lessons. So things like understanding risk, things like the time value of money, setting goals. Those things can have an impact on long-term financial behaviors. And, I want to just hang out there for a moment too, because I just submitted another, or maybe I shouldn't talk about it. Some of you might be reviewers. But when you talk about the quality of financial education, looking at results like these will let you know that in terms of the financial education that's going forward, it's important to not just talk about how to fill out a check. Like, who still fills out checks? Or just saving money, but really go into a deep dive on what to do with the funds once you've saved them. It's important to talk about the time value of money and how you need to beat inflation, especially now. Inflation is higher now, right? And what are some things that you can do to overcome inflation so that your purchasing power is not being eroded. And so talks about investing is important, as well as other topics. I mean, all of the topics that we talk about in the financial planning curriculum, taxes and estate planning and planning for retirement are important. But to start with, just what do you do with those dollars after you save them is really important. And then the last point there is African American students that received the message to invest were more likely to have better outcomes in financial management and financial optimism than students of other races. And I wanted to end with that takeaway because it's a nice segue into the next slide. But just looking at African American students that received this message to invest, they had better outcomes in financial management, right? And let's remember what financial management was. Financial management were these behaviors like budgeting, like tracking your spending, but it also included things like your confidence in managing your money and how you feel about your ability to manage your money. So this is a little graphic. Okay, I think you all can see it. This is a little graphic from a different research project that I had done. And this was particularly about African American college students. And what we were trying to find in this study was what affects their financial self-efficacy or their confidence or their in managing their money. What we found about African-American college students, and this was different than all of the other college students that we looked at in this study, was that objective financial knowledge was not a significant predictor of how confident they were in managing their money. So what does that mean? What am I saying here? I'm saying that just having some knowledge, objective financial knowledge is based on, the measure is based on being able to answer some questions. It would be like taking a test, a personal finance test. And so just being able to answer those questions or having knowledge doesn't make the Black students feel more confident in their ability to manage money. It also did not have, it was also not a significant predictor of their behaviors around their money. So budgeting, tracking, or making sure that you are monitoring your accounts and the transactions that go through your account. Just objective knowledge, having this financial knowledge, was not a significant predictor of whether or not they were going to actually do these things. But what was interesting here was the path from financial knowledge to financial self-efficacy. So for African-American students, this shows the importance of actually doing some things with your money. And that being a significant predictor of how confident you are in your ability to manage. So this speaks to the necessity for more experiential kind of learning, where they actually get some hands-on things that that they're doing with their money, and that leads to more confidence. So how does that relate to the previous study with the messages, right? So in the previous, in the study that that this talk was based on, right? Talking to kids about investing improves, talking to African-American children about investing improves their financial management outcome, right? Well, here, the financial management is a significant predictor of how confident you are in terms of managing your money. So talk to them about investing, and they become, they improve their financial management, or they improve their behaviors. Improving their behaviors then shows to be a significant predictor of them having more confidence. And so if you want to build the confidence of Black college students in managing their money, it can start with talking to them about investing. And that message alone should help improve their confidence around money. Okay. All right, and that is just the references that we had here today. All right, I appreciate your applause, but I would appreciate your engagement and some feedback even more. Like I said, this is the first time I've talked about this this paper in a public setting, and so I want to hear what you guys say. Yes. Oh, and poor Tim, he had to listen to some of this twice. He heard some of it yesterday.
On the last slide, I was thinking about how, I know this is particularly used statistically, but like I could see how a lot of like bi-directional, like that you're better at management, so you feel like you have more knowledge, and that you feel like good for your self-efficacy, so you are more likely to seek out more knowledge, or you're better at. I could see how that can go. I'm not sure if that quite off the data, but.
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. And yeah, we made no, no assertions about the direction of or any kind of causation or anything like that. Yeah. Yes.
You
Go
know,
ahead.
okay, so I was wondering what you thought, why was it that the Black college students had more confidence than the like reference category and most of the other categories? Like that seems to be the most like standout.
Optimism, is that?
Yeah,
funny?
yeah, so in predicting optimism, why was it that Black students had?
Can you show us those items again? That's kind of helpful too, right?
Yes.
See what the folks were looking at in terms of when they answer the questions.
Okay, so in terms of, so these are the 3 questions that go into that. And okay, so it could be that many Black college students are first generation students and have been taught that education is your way out. And so they feel that just by being in college and have an opportunity to earn a degree is going to increase their ability to, have some long-term financial well-being. Yes.
All right, this isn't, I was hoping there'd be some other questions so I could like get this thought more coherent. But I had introduced myself earlier, but for those of you who I haven't met, I work with United Way. And we have a practitioner group of organizations that do financial education, empowerment, coaching. Some of them are here. I think a lot of them are online. But one of the things we've talked about over the past year was just looking at like a racial equity lens and bringing it to some of this work. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, and these other sets of research we looked at, was the idea that just really doing education around historic inequities and like the history of financial structures seem to give people more confidence too. Just kind of this understanding that, oh, I'm not bad at money. Like my family has had generations of the deck being stacked against them. And so I kind of wonder, I don't know how that could kind of interplay with some of the investing conversations and just being able to see the bigger picture. And maybe it gives you a little bit more feeling of optimism or self-efficacy, or just, oh, I can control my future more than I thought, but also I'm acknowledging these things that are outside of my control.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Actually, we were talking about this yesterday. It was a different study, and it was a more of a gender-based study, but I think that it probably relates in that the positive financial behaviors that there was no difference in the positive financial behaviors. And so what really was driving some of the results was other obstacles being stacked against the group and that affecting their financial stress. And so I think you're probably right on to something.
It wasn't really questions.
It's like that's coming along. So this is not about finances, but there was a new paper that just came out by Keisha Rice, who I don't know if folks know Keisha, she's fantastic. But anyway, it's kind of to that point, and so I'm looking this up. So it's called Echoes of Slavery, Reflections on Contemporary Racial Discrimination in Black Americans' Romantic Relationships. And so this was part of her dissertation. So she used ecological and intersectional perspectives about how Black Americans' reflections on historical context of slavery with discrimination shapes their experiences of their own relationships. So like kind of thinking about that, like not that you have to do like an intersectionality expert, but that is awesome. But then like thinking about like, if you do have that knowledge and like, how do you contextualize that and how do you bring that in? It does give super important information. And I think it also like brings it back to the discussion of like, where is the onus? Is it on the individual? Like, oh, I can't invest because I don't have any money? Or is it like, because you're in this, you're like in this systemic, like you're in this system in which like, there are issues with investing because you can't get a loan, like you literally get evicted, right? Like there's like all these obstacles against you and your family and your community. So for every like 2 steps forward, there's like 8,000 steps back. So I mean, I think that like more and more we are reframing discussions using those lenses like intersectionality, ecological theory, because they're necessary and needed.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a really important, like, and we don't have much of that, like in the financial like theory, like the Goodmanson and James,
Mhm.
there's nothing about race or ethnicity,
Yeah.
right? And like, if it is, it's like a control variable.
Right.
So
Yeah.
like, if anything, it's like there, but it's like, let's just control for that versus like center that or centralize that, or like make that part of like the questions that we're gonna ask going forward. So that's a really relevant question, I think.
I was just gonna say, like, I love how you dived into, I would love to see more too, of kind of how you wrote it up on how our experiences growing up and how our parents' thought process around finance, whether they shared it or not, impacts their interpretation of finance as they grow older. With some of the classes I teach, we were actually was at one of the high schools here, and we touch on it real quick, but it's just a real quick touch on what you saw growing up or may have been exposed to may not be the right thing, and it's okay to question that. And seeing that in your work, that's why I was really engaged with that. So I love that. I would love to see more of that. And just, I feel like that's such the biggest thing, because anytime I bring that up, every single time, no matter if it's young adults, that's the number one thing I have questions on at the very end, is they all want to talk about that. So it's like a floodgate when that's talked about.
Future research, Melissa Delgado, I need some grad students.
We try.
Go ahead. No, I've already spoken.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering, you said the African American students who got messages of investing did better. So do we know what was the difference in how they grew up or something like that in the students who did get the messages of investing versus those who don't? Maybe their parents were more educated, or like they were higher SES that caused them to get that messaging versus those that did not have that messaging.
Yeah, that's I think that's a great point, and that's something that we did not look at in this study. But so I think that going forward, doing some more within group analysis would be really important to bring something like that out. Yeah, I think that's a great point.
I was
Yes.
also, sorry, I was also wondering, I mean, I feel like each racial or ethnic group have like messages indigenously that they like pass on about finances. I think it would be interesting, like tap into those kinds of like messages. Also, like, for example, personally speaking, my father would say something like, only spread your like blanket until like you can like suffice, like messages like those that are like indigenous messages that get passed on that generations to generation, which are specific to like your community, your racial ethnic group. I think it would be interesting to like tap into those financial socialization messages about like credit, like don't take too much credit, or like please spread your legs as much as you can, like things like that. To like understand how it would impact these three dependent variables. I think that would be interesting. That was the thought I had.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It sounds like a qualitative data collection to me. So Melissa, we need to write a grant proposal to do that.
And I'm thinking too, like along with the heck thing, like I think the elephant in the room too is like what Thomas studies in terms of debt.
Mhm.
Like maybe the optimism question is like, I'm doing so great in college and now I have $2 billion in debt. So like, how optimistic do I feel about my future? Like before the current administration announced the debt forgiveness, which is like also like legally what's going on. Like maybe it's like great to be in college and then you think about all the debt that you have. So maybe that's part of it too, which would kind of connect with what you're saying too about like, we'll only go to college if we can afford that, or there's programs that we can pay back that debt. Because that's hugely impact. I mean, again, I would defer to Tom, he's much more expert than me, but like that's huge, the whole idea about that. And who goes to college, how much debt they have, and we know the impact of debt too, especially
Absolutely,
for racial and ethnic groups.
absolutely.
There are like cultural and ethnic variations on how college students pay for their education. Like I know personally, like culturally, it was important for my parents to like pay a part of like my college tuition, because it was like ingrained in like cultural heritage, you know?
Yeah, that's
So
so
like it would be important to like know who pays,
Yeah,
what goes into all of that.
yeah, and again, Thomas is the super expert, but I think about like what you've written in terms of like grandparents sometimes who take on debt for their grandkids, parents who take on debt for their kids, and like, the kids, the adults who also have that debt, so like multi-generational debt sometimes in families, yeah.
And that's something that can be looked at in this data set, because they do ask questions about your primary source of paying for school. But where it falls short is they don't ask those messages questions anymore. Yeah.
Well, this kind of ties back to the data you talked about yesterday, because you have presented on transgender and non-binary folks, like using this data, and now the optimism was lower amongst them, and our thing you're talking about was like possibly, losing family support and then having the debt, that sort of tying back to right now.
Oh, it's just really incredible to see this work. And it also made me question, because we're talking about race. I also was thinking about like, if you asked about like internet studies or like generational studies. Because also from like personal experience, I'm a first generation immigrant, and my parents, like, I feel like navigating the system of like the economic system, like in a different country, and then translating that here, it's really hard. I would say, like, I saw it from my own parents, like they were often confused on like how to translate what they knew to like a new system, and then how that impacts the messages that they're giving to their children. Because I feel like I didn't really grow up with like a lot of like messages, because my parents themselves were kind of like, still learning the system, so it's kind of difficult to know.
Right. Yeah, so I think that's a great point. And that's something that may be able to be looked at with this data set, and I'm only speaking to this data set. Because they do ask citizenship questions, but I don't recall if they asked a question about immigration. But I do know they ask questions about citizenship and first generation status.
Yeah, going back to the qualitative study that you're all collaborating. Some important questions maybe to consider is, and going along with race and ethnicity and cultural differences, but also practices and how they might vary by, yes, immigration status or SES in particular. For example, in the Latinx community, there's cundines, which are where you are, it's a saving kind of model, there's no interest, but everybody gets a share, and so everybody participates. And sorry, was that somebody?
There was standards in Spanish, in Mexico, there were standards.
Standards, yes, and so there's like the saving model where people contribute monthly, one person is in charge, and every month or payday, a certain person gets it, so it's like some way of saving. There's just, it don't gain interest, but it's a practice around finance. Or there's also some practices where you save money. There's a lot of mistrust in banks, and so there's not the passive income that other families take advantage of. And so just knowing about what these practices and the rationale for using these practices, I think would be really good to.
The point that you just made about mistrust in banks, I think speaks also to just some of the societal obstacles that that different groups will face or see, because every time you have a bank fail, that plays into individuals' perspectives about the banking industry and whether or not they want to put their money in those institutions. And so that would affect the opening of bank account question. But things like saving, there's many ways that you can save. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's interesting. And it definitely should be a part of the qualitative study that we're collaborating on. Yeah.
Just make a comment based on the dependent variables, and more like, try to understand also we are pretty much at the center of consumerism, right?
Mhm.
The US is pretty much the highest consumption of everything. So going back to the financial stress, you know, that people want to participate with peers and things that I enjoy. I mean, people, and especially, I want to say that this particular cohort that was part of the research are mostly the Gen Z generation, right? So which they can definitely have a totally different set of behaviors too. However, that can be applicable because, I mean, right now I was driving by and a bunch of students in green, right, celebrated some Paris Day. So that's the part too that we also, in my view, and I don't know how translated into the research, to see how this particular generation sees the world and how also that because of the economic system that we live in, that is so embedded in consumerism, right? For some of us who have the fortune to be from another country and learn another culture or travel outside the United States, we don't see what we see here in the US, right? For instance, storage shed. I mean, it's like, I think it's a big business, no matter where we go. I mean, there's like, I mean, if you go to other countries and you don't use that, there is no that concept of storage units. So that's what I was thinking more about. How do we get into you know, the consumerism as a whole, and translate that into some research that would be more, I don't know, I don't want to say real, but I think it's more sustainable than, you know, just going for these dependent variables, which is very interesting for me. But again, it goes back also to the generational side, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, sure.
The personal storage thing is interesting, because that's like rooted a lot in the same like idea of saving and like trauma sometimes of like holding on to things.
All that stuff go. But then it paints so
Well, I
much
think
over
we
the
have
jump.
a piece of that, right? In terms of some of that behavior, but I think I've seen people that they just, you know, they don't want to get rid of stuff, but then they just, you know, save it or what? I don't know. Maybe it's all value.
Maybe talk about industrial.
Yes, exactly. You know,
The
and
real
also-
estate, storage is the new real estate. My husband was just talking, he works in corporate America, they were just talking about this, and saying that it's really hard, they're raising prices, this is the thing, then you think.
listen to George Carlin.
And it's much easier to get a storage facility approved than affordable housing
Yeah.
Yes.
with zoning.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and also in terms of the, you know, the definition, for instance, what's the definition of investing? That probably people will be able to understand that because investment seems to be kind of complex for some people, right? Savings is relatively easier to understand than investing because now you're talking stock market or crypto, right? Or whatever that is. So I think that's something that probably will you know, define more for the group.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And those terms weren't defined in the survey. And that's part of the problem is with using secondary survey data for these kinds of studies. So you just can't get the nuances that you can when you do qualitative studies.
So I was just thinking about, you know, you had said that you had asked about mother's education, father's education, household income, and going back to that generational idea, would it be more insightful to ask about like, did a parent ever lose a job? Did you ever lose a home? Did you ever have to like, you know, those types of experiences that families might have, because they might have, you know, both mom and dad have, you know, high degrees and good jobs, but if they've lost jobs, like if they're in the tech sector, and they both lost their job right now, and then you're having to downsize and move, like the impact of what that means generationally for the children in that household might then dictate different outcomes around stress and management and optimism. I know like Glenn Elder's work with life course theory found a lot of really interesting things around the Great Depression, right? And thinking how old you were as a child going through that and seeing what happened to your family really dictated different trajectories for those individuals as they went into adulthood. So there could be things more insightful around like those experiences than about mom or dad's education or income.
I agree. And if I did okay, and Melissa Barnett invites me to come again, then I will I'll talk about a thematic analysis that we recently had published, which goes into a little more detail of about students and what they saw growing up in the household and how it impacted their attitudes and biases about money. So I have done some of that work just not this one.
So with that, we are at 2:15. So I do want to, thank you, and we're going to sign off online, or if people want to. Thank you for generating so much discussion. So I don't know if people want to, hang around a little bit, if they have time, but thank you all for coming.